Trumpeter Jeremy Peltz has, in my estimation, one of the most beautiful tones of any jazz trumpeter working today. He has a big sound, just a silken tone that you really remember and that makes an impression right off the bat. Peltz has released a couple dozen recordings, including his first on Fresh Sound called Profile in 2002, followed by Close to My Heart, Insight, Identity, Shock Value, Live at Smoke, November, Men of Honor, The Talented Mr. Peltz, Soul, Water and Earth, Face Forward, Tale, Musings, and Other Reveries, Jive Culture, High Art, The Co-op, Make Noise, Noir and Rouge, Live in Paris, Jubilation, Celebrating Cannonball Adderley, The Artist, The Art of Intimacy, Volume 1 on High Note in 2020, and most recently, Griot, This Is Important, High Note 2021. He also just self-published a book, I believe it is called Griot, where he, like Art Taylor's Notes and Tones, interviews several of the musicians that he's worked with. I visited Peltz in his Harlem home, which gave me a chance to walk around Harlem. I don't get up there very often. It's a really beautiful neighborhood with many beautiful buildings, many friendly people, and something around every corner. A really beautiful neighborhood that covers a large part of Manhattan. So I hope you enjoy this top 5 jazz vinyl picks with trumpeter Jeremy Peltz.
What love and romance have done to me. The sounds of the night, drowsy and deep. The sounds of the night, love just seems to be the end.
So I was in Minnesota not too long ago and ran into the shop called Cheapo Records and did some diving and investigating. I'm going through a real big Joe Williams phase right now, and love baritone voices, Arthur Prysock and different singers, but Joe Williams has a complete other type of vibe. And I found this record which I'd never seen before, Jump for Joy, Joe Williams, and arranged and conducted by Jimmy Jones and Oliver Nelson. And I'll be the first person to admit that I'm not the most technically savvy when it comes to being able to tell you everything about the LP itself and when it was printed, or if this is an original print or what have you, but sure does sound good. And I was just doing an interview not too long ago, and I was talking to somebody about not being envious of anybody that has to kind of tabulate how many appearances Clark Terry's made on record, even if they have been not particularly noted. And then, you really don't know a lot of players on here. They didn't do a good job with that, but I'll tell you this much, Clark Terry's completely all over this, so it's an extra dividend having that with Joe.
What is it about Joe Williams' voice, maybe as opposed to Arthur Prysock or Johnny Hartman, which I hadn't thought of, but I did there, all kind of baritone.
Yeah. With Joe's voice, there's just a certain type of Arthur Prysock's voice is like ground shaking, which I also love too. There's not much range to it. Whereas Joe Williams has that kind of range of being, ground shaking, but then all of a sudden can go all the way up there. There's a great record of him swinging at Birdland where he plays the blues, and he does this shriek, and I've never heard anybody do a shriek before. But so he's got this expansive range, and also the way I think one of the things that he and somebody like Johnny Hartman and also Nat King Cole share are the their gift of elocution and the way that they pronounce their lyrics. So yeah, that's what I'm into.
You have a pretty beautiful voice yourself. Do you sing?
Not at all.
Man, you should. Jeez, I never heard you speak before. You have an amazing voice.
Well, thank you. I'll tell you, one time I actually thought that I might do it. We did my record Men of Honor, and that was the first record that I had recorded under my own name over at Rudy Van Gelder's studio. It was just when Rudy was still alive. And he was even excited because I was like, you know what, I'm going to sing this ballad. It was a ballad called I'm in Love Again. And I was going to do it. And then at the last minute, because he had everything set up, and at the last minute I just chickened out. I was like, I can't do it.
You have such a beautiful tone and a beautiful style.
Well,
Is that, with trumpet players or with you, is that the same as you singing?
well, I mean, it's something that I strive for in terms of tone. I'm very cognizant of that, of trying to make it as rounded as possible, and as something that draws you in. I mean, that's something that I love about listening to different vocalists anyhow. I mean, I used to go see Shirley Horn anytime she was in town, and I wasn't really around to catch the twilight years of Blossom Dearie, but I mean, I would have loved to have seen her as well. Did any of those, when I first moved to town, I was playing with Bobby Short, and he's more, pronounced and, and very animated at times, but then there was also, I mean, as most cabaret singers are, they can go from one extreme to the other, and that other extreme, that quiet extreme, is something that really kind of touched me, was in a very profound way.
That's cool you mentioned Blossom Dearie. She was so hip.
Yeah, absolutely. She even wrote a song called I'm Hip. So, can't get hipper than that. So this one is a record, I almost said CD, a record that I actually had never heard of until I found it at Jazz Record Center, because I'm thinking about Chicago. All right, we can do this again. So this record is something that I stumbled upon at Jazz Record Center, and I'd never heard of it. And this is the Buoyant Mr. Gillespie, and this is a great record with the same rhythm section that can be found on Half Trumpet Willet's site, mid to late 50s. This period of Dizzy Gillespie's playing is something that, oddly enough, you never really hear a lot of people talking about. You can talk about Dizzy in the 40s, or you'll talk about, his big band in the mid 50s. But his small group work and his playing, and especially his playing, was probably at its peak at this point, I would think. One of the people that mentors of mine is Dr. Eddie Henderson. He was always talking about, you should play quartet more, and which I do, based off of that kind of that advice. And I think he said pretty much all major trumpet players at a certain point played quartet. Now this isn't exactly a quartet, but I think what he meant was that the absence of a second horn. Because, see, in the absence, he's got Junior Manson Les Spann, who's playing a little bit of flute, but really doing more guitar work on here. And Les Spann is kind of like the second voice. But it gives you a lot more room that you don't necessarily have. Like if you look checking out, Diz with James Moody, which are all, or Leo Wright, which are all great records anyhow. Dizzy, especially his small group work, always knew how to delegate certain and create certain just pieces within the piece. So it wasn't always a blowing session at all. I mean, there were interludes, there were different setups and whatnot, and this just continues with that. And he takes, a bigger piece of the pie a lot of times too, which is refreshing to hear because, I mean, like I said, 50s Dizzy is pretty much unbeatable. I mean, another one of my favorite records, which I don't have on LP, is Roy and Diz, and it's just a treat to hear the lineage, but also, the state of one-upmanship. Respect being, paramount to that. Roy and Diz were, at the top of their games, especially Dizzy. So this is definitely one of my favorites, a new favorite of mine. So one of the things that made me so excited about getting into my collection, getting back into collecting vinyl, was the prospect of really listening to either vocalists or big bands. And you know, a lot of people would think that, you know, sooner think that I would be sitting up here listening to, you know, progressive quintet music and whatnot, and I have some of that too. But really, I like the fullness of a big band sound. And need no introduction, Count Basie, Roulette, which is a great period for Count Basie anyhow. This was something also that I was unfamiliar with, that I found at Jazz Record Center. The legend Count Basie and his orchestra with Benny Carter arranging. This captures some good solo work from probably the youngest trumpet player and newest member of the band at that point, Al Aaron, but also you have Thad Jones and of course Snooky Young at the top there, and my old boss, Frank Foster, who I played with when I first moved to town. And these are some great slick arrangements, man. This is, again, you know, I could sit over here and say every record I have is my favorite, and it would be true. But yeah, this is again, you know, I love going through bins and seeing things that I've never heard before. Continuing with big bands, man, this was one of my favorite things hearing growing up. And you have the meeting of two iconic big bands, Count Basie and Duke Ellington, playing together. And I remember, you know, my connection to it is Frank Foster. And so I remember talking to Frank Foster about this record, and he, you know, he loved the camaraderie. You know, he also, there was a song where he had to battle against Paul Gonsalves, and he always felt a certain kind of way about that. But he was also a jokester too. He was trying to play like he was mad, like, oh. But this record, especially one of the songs on here, well, a couple charts. I also play with Frank West as well, and so I'd ask him about some of these charts. And one of my favorite Frank West charts is Segway and C. Both on this record, and I think the first time I might have heard it was Count Basie at Night at Birdland, which I don't have on LP, but I've certainly heard it many times. Yeah, and Wild Man, that's another great one. There's a movie that came out in the 50s called Paris Blues. Actually, it might have been 1960. But Paul Newman, Sidney Poitier, Diane Carroll, and Ann Woodward. And, you know, there's a movie about two expats moved from America, jazz musicians, and, you know, to France. Paul Newman plays the trombone terribly. And Sidney Poitier is almost a dead ringer for Wayne Shorter at some certain angles, playing tenor saxophone. But there's a scene where Pops comes in, and he's not billed as, well, he's not called Louis Armstrong in the movie. I think he had a different name. But, you know, he comes in there and he starts this jam session. This is one of the more iconic scenes in the film where, you know, they're like, all right, there's two themes that are from this record. Well, I'm not even sure what came first. It might have been this record first and then the movie, or vice versa. But there's two themes. There's the Battle Royal, which is the first thing on here, song on here, and then there's Wild Man Blues, which is how he always marched in. So he crashed the jazz club and he comes in, and he plays these fills, pops, and it's just, it's great. So I love the way that it was sounded. I think this was recorded, it doesn't say on here, but I'm pretty sure this was at the Columbia Studio, 30th Street. You certainly hear the room in great effect, especially having both big bands there. I mean, it's a powerful sound, and it's one that I love listening to quite frequently. This doggone house, and let me introduce myself to this, because I want you.
I'm telling you, I don't bar nobody. I don't bar nothing. There's one thing that goes.
So finally, well, lastly rather, you never have too much Clark Terry, and just like I was mentioning earlier, somebody to calculate how many recordings Clark Terry was on, regardless of if they were solo, but just more appearances. I think there's a plethora of Clark Terry recordings that exist that you don't know, as a leader. And this was one that kind of escaped me. Clearly, there's been more versions of mumbles, especially with Oscar Peterson famously, and of course he used to do mumbles on Doc Severinsen on the Tonight Show. But this one, man, I mean, two versions stick out to me. I love. I think it's called Electric Clark or something like that. Is where he's playing the trumpet hooked up to a baritone, and I think it might be called baritone mumbles, or it's called electric mumbles, and that's hip too. And this is more of the same, except it's completely acoustic. But I mean, he's mumbling, but he's also talking. He's having these different, conversations, and I mean, it's just a thrill to hear. And it happens a couple times on here, so that's why I love hearing the humor that he's got on it, and he talks about it too. There's a great that's another thing I love about these records is that you have the liner notes now. It's like finally back to liner notes, and
Right.
This one, these aren't even liner notes. This is a transcribed conversation that Clark had with Bob Shedd, who was the producer of this date. I think it's a great. It's like every other Clark Terry record. It's a feel-good record. What I like about Clark Terry is the humor, foremost in his playing, and the flex from a trumpet point of view. I mean, it doesn't get any more flexible than that, and how he sticks out. This is another thing that I was having a conversation that I was having not too long before you arrived here. Was how immediately recognizable he is in any situation. His trumpet voice is, and the way that I explained it, because I think we were talking. The conversation I was having was talking about comparing and contrasting Thad Jones and Art Farmer and a couple different players, and in terms of big band playing, you want the section to sound as one, so that goes without saying. So when you're listening to Count Basie, Thad Jones has a very identifiable voice too, and so does Joe Newman, and a lot of players. But as soon as you hear that section, it just sounds like one horn, which is a great thing, right? And that's not to say that when you hear Clark Terry with Duke Ellington, for instance, that he sticks out like a sore thumb. Because that's another section that's just everybody's a complete original. You got Ray Nance, you got Clark, you got Cat, you got but there's something about whether Clark is playing in the inside of the harmony or whether he's playing the top line, the first trumpet. It's immediately identifiable, and that's a trademark. That is how he made his money. I mean, amongst the other things, but I mean, that was immediately identifiable, and people, it ceased being about we need a lead player, and it was more about we need Clark, which is important.
Well, Jeremy, thanks a lot. Thanks for doing this, man. It was a blast.
No problem.
Keep buying those records, man.
Oh yeah, I definitely will.